Hi everyone, nice to be back here in London for another edition of droidcon. Nice to be back here in London to see so many people gathering for this event, such a nice event to network, do networking and get in touch with many Android developers across the globe. So yeah, this session is not going to be a very long one. Actually, it's more going to be like a coffee break kind of session and an introductory one. So I promise it's not going to be a very complex one. And right before jumping into the actual content, I would like to introduce myself briefly. So my name is Neamtu. I'm a software sales engineer and a developer advocate for Zebra Technologies, covering the EMEA region. Been with Zebra since 2022 now, so 2.5 years. And before joining Zebra, been working on two other companies as a software and Android developer. And I've been doing Android development for more than 7 years now. Now, on to the actual content for today. As from the title, your app could use a secondary screen. So why could your app use a secondary screen? So if we are talking about enterprise use cases, because that's what we are going to refer today, we have seen a shift into the customer attention on what to use for their environments. And we have seen that people would just like to use more their Android devices. So they would just not want to spend too much money on complex or just expensive Windows workstations. So, for instance, you have the typical worker using the Android device inside the warehouse, and then they would just like to use the same Android device also for other operations, but they would just like to use it on a larger display. So in that case, you need your application to be as flexible as possible for this secondary display. You might want to share and show more information to the user while using that application or secondary screen. We have seen other type of different use cases also with Samsung DeX. So if you know Samsung DeX, probably you already know about Samsung DeX. So Samsung DeX is a solution that Samsung offers for their smartphones and also tablets. You can just connect the USB-C cable over the tablet or smartphone, and boom, you have a whole desktop experience over the secondary display, and you can use the same applications but being projected in a different way over the secondary screen. So we, from Zebra, we also offer a solution for this. So we have our own solution. I'm going to talk about that by the end of the session. And in case you don't know the company, please feel free to come to our booth, and we'll talk about that later on at the booth, and you can also show it in action, how it works. So just to keep on a couple of use cases, just to give you an idea, so we could actually talk about 4 different verticals on where the secondary screen can actually be beneficial for customers. So talking about retail, healthcare, warehousing, and also hospitality. So in the case of retail, for instance, associates can use secondary screen to assist customers with different kind of operations, such as product informations or just assist selling in different ways. And at the same time also for managers. So managers can also use corporate kind of applications, so they can use them on a secondary screen. Healthcare, same situation also here. We have use cases where like for example in hospitals or just clinics, the operators can use it to access systems, so they can complete data entry at admissions and also discharge forms. Warehousing, then we can use a secondary display just to have a better picture of how to print the labels, assist with the shipping labels and bills of lading, so all this kind of stuff in the case of warehousing. And then we have also hospitality, which is another vertical where a secondary screen can be used to improve the concierge overall experience for the customers actually using the device. Now, if we have to talk about a little bit of coding or just a couple of things to keep in mind when talking about supporting multi-window, So multi-window actually has been around on Android for some time now. So it is actually being supported by default on every Android application. So there is a specific attribute which you can use inside the Android manifest, which is called resizable activity. But this attribute actually is being enabled by default. So you don't actually have to use it because automatically the operating system will try in the best way to optimize your let's say your activity in order to be used on a larger display, or not just larger display, but also on a foldable screen, because we are not just talking about secondary screens, but also foldables. So in case you're just going to explicitly declare that you don't want this activity to not be optimized, then obviously you can do that. So you can specify it in the activity tag to be false, this attribute. Then we have different behavior on how this flag, this attribute would be used. I mean, the behavior of this attribute, how it's being used on applications targeting API level 31 or major. So essentially, if we are having the application being run on a display which has a screen density of more than 600 dps, then essentially, if the resizable activity attribute is set on true, then it's not going to specify if the app can be resized, but it will be, I mean, it's not going to specify if it supports multi-window, but it would just specify if the application can be resized. Then if the resizable activity, in this case, if it's set on false, then the operating system will just try to use the available display so that it can automatically fit the overall window across the dimensions of the screen. Then if we have a situation with a small screen, so screen density less than 600 dps, and if the resizable activity is set on true, then it will have the same behavior that we talked about. So it would just say if the activity actually supports multi-window, and in the case of resizable activity false, so if it's false, then automatically multi-window will not be supported in this case. Then another thing that you have to, you can also do actually, is that you can actually specify a layout tag for each activity. So essentially you can specify the default height and width that the activity should have when it is being launched on a secondary display. And you can also specify the gravity and the minimum height and the minimum weight. So essentially, you cannot resize that activity less than those dimensions. So it's just a constraint for the user so that you keep, the activity well organized and you don't have any sort of misplacements with the components. Then another thing is related to the Windows Metrics API. So you can use the Windows Metrics API to accurately determine the size of the app window. And I'm sure many here actually use already the Windows Metrics API, so you already know about them. And last thing I want to mention is the usage of the right context object when necessary. So context object actually includes lots of important information that you can use, and same goes also for the activity. So it includes specific information about screen density and the Windows metrics. So it's important that when you are working with multiple displays, you actually use the right context object, not the application context, but the right activity context, just so you can then use it as you wish, essentially. Now, if we want to actually work with the connected displays, there is a specific display manager that we can use. So the display manager actually has lots of different APIs that we can use to manipulate the displays. We can actually track how many displays we have connected if we actually going to have more than one display connected to the device. And we can also get different information about the display, such as the name, the ID, and we can also determine on which display the application is currently being run, or the activity in this case. And of course, we can also use it. We can also use the display ID, which we are gathering from the display manager APIs, to launch an activity. So how do we launch an activity on our secondary display? So it's pretty simple. It's going to be the same intent that we are using, but just with some slight modifications. So we will have to create an activity options object where we are going to specify the display ID. So there's a specific method that we have to use, the set launch display ID. So we are going to put there the targeted display on which we want to launch the activity. And then we will also have to specify two different flags called activity launch adjacent and the activity new task. So the activity new task is already a flag that we already know about it. And then the launch adjacent, this might be something new for you. So this flag is actually being used only for these sort of situations. So whenever we are launching a new activity over a new display, or whenever we are launching a new activity on, let's say, on a foldable device when we have available space that you can use. So launch adjacent actually says that. So it actually launches the activity adjacently from another activity already running. So we can use that on a secondary display, but also on foldables. And then we just start activity. We use the start activity method to pass the intent and then the options, which we are going to then to convert it to a bundle. Other things to keep in mind when talking about secondary displays is about the life cycle. So life cycle is really important here. So there are different situations when when full life cycle events are going to be triggered over the activity. So in this case, it's going to be a full recreation of the activity. And there are other situations when it's going to be only a partial life cycle event. So whenever we are moving the activity to the desktop, for instance, or whenever we are maximizing or getting back to the normal size of the window, or whenever the window is resized, when talking about significant changes about when we are resizing the window, all of this are going to trigger a full life cycle of the activity. So that, of course, has to be handled accordingly by the developer. When we're talking about partial life cycle, events could include back from minimized. So whenever we have our application in minimized state, so that could be the same way on how we are picking back the application from the recents on the phone. Windows dragged, so in this case, whenever we are dragging the window across the desktop, it's not going to trigger any lifecycle event. When the window is closed, it's like closing the activity on the phone, so it's going to be the same also on the desktop. So the onPause, the onStop, and the onDestroy methods are going to be triggered. And then when we are minimizing the activity, in this case, it's going to be like putting the application back to the recents. So the onPause and the onStop methods are going to be triggered in this case. Right, so what I wanted to also mention is about saving the UI states. So I already mentioned, this is actually connected to the lifecycle that we are talking about earlier, the lifecycle events. So of course, during these changes, we have to make sure that the application actually retain and restore the state of the UI whenever the user is actually changing, or whenever we are, let's say, moving the activity from one monitor to one display to another, in order to have a consistent UI experience, so that the user is not, feeling any sort of doesn't actually feel that the activity has gone through some changes. So it has to be as seamless as possible for the user, of course. And we can talk about any sort of events, UI events here, like rotating the device whenever we are entering multi-window mode, whenever we are, let's say, folding a foldable in this case with multiple displays, whenever we are resizing the application. So everything that might actually trigger lifecycle events across the activity. So you can actually handle this automatically, so you can actually specify it in the Android manifest if you want some specific UI states to be ignored, or you can also just handle them in the code personally. Now, we don't have way too much time left, so I just wanted to mention what we are offering in terms of solution from our side. So it's called the Zebra Workstation Connect. So this is actually a solution that's being composed of two different parts. So there is a hardware, which is this one. So if you guys want to see it, we have it at the booth. We have it connected to the display in case you want to see it. So this is a workstation which enables the device to be charged at the same time through pins connected to the back. It has USB ports, 4 different USB ports, Ethernet, and USB, and also the power connector on the bottom. And then the other part essentially is related to the software side of how the Zebra Workstation Connect works. So it's related to an agent that runs in the background on the Android device. And this is going to be needed for developers or admin personas to personalize the overall experience of how the Zebra Workstation Connect works. So you can communicate with the Zebra Workstation in 2 different ways, either via managed configurations, so you can send specific commands towards the Zebra Workstation Connect via managed configurations. If you don't know how this works, so it's a way on how EMMs providers can send or just set specific settings to an application so that they being used in a specific way. Specifically, we're talking about enterprise use cases here. And then another way of sending such parameters and changes is via JSON string. So you can also, a developer can submit JSON strings directly to the Zebra Workstation Connect. And when we're talking about parameters in this case, we can talk about specific settings like how the external display mode can be set. So we can actually set if the display needs to mirror the original display, or if we just want to extend the first screen over the second one. We can also specify some UI features which are available for the user. We can also specify the screen resolution as well. And at the same time, we can also create specific shortcuts for the current user. So just so we can have a more personalized experience for the user that's going to use the device. And of course, there are much more on this available for the developer. So that's pretty much it. I don't know if you have any questions. If you have questions or just want to see it in action, feel free to come to our booth and I will show it to you. But if not, if there are no questions, thank you very much for attending.